I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from the people she told. The message wasn't meant for me. That much was obvious the second I read it. It mentioned things no one else should have known, things I had only ever said out loud to one person, my best friend. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. That maybe I'd told someone else and forgotten, but then more messages surfaced, more details, more proof that the one person I trusted with everything had been quietly sharing it all with the very people who hurt me. Every secret, every fear, every story I trusted her to protect. And the worst part wasn't what she said, it was how long she'd been doing it. While standing right next to me, pretending to be on my side. That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was something much deeper. Who should a person trust? Can they really find someone they can trust? Or does such a person even exist? I think trust is the most valuable emotion in life. If you trust someone, almost all the problems related to that person disappear. My name is Zinnia Hartwell, and I was 17 years old the night the most trusted person in my life made sure I would never trust anyone the same way again. People always say that betrayal comes from enemies, from strangers, from people you never really liked in the first place. And for a long time I believed that too, because the person who destroyed me wore my best friend's face and knew every single thing I had ever whispered in the dark. But before I tell you about Talia, I need to tell you about the storm, because the storm is where everything began. And nothing that came after makes sense without it. The warnings had been running across every screen in the county for 2 full days before landfall. And people in our neighborhood were moving fast, taping windows, loading cars, calling relatives who lived further inland, doing all the things you do when you know the water is coming and you do not want to be there when it arrives. The feeling in the air at that moment is on a whole different level. People are anxious. Some are trying to save their homes, others their cars. Those without homes, the people living on the streets, are deep in thought. From a distance, it looks like everyone is struggling. As for our people, they were certainly prepared as well. I had packed a bag already. A small duffel with my journal, my charger, 2 changes of clothes, and the medication I took every morning, because I assumed we were all leaving together the way families were supposed to during mandatory evacuations. We had 3 animals at the time. An elderly golden retriever named Biscuit, a younger terrier mix called Pip, and a one-eyed tabby cat named Fig, who slept across my feet every single night, without exception. If you could see them. All of our pets were so cute and beautiful. I remember standing in the hallway with my bag on my shoulder, watching my father Rowan move through the house with that focused, deliberate energy he always had when he was managing a situation, and I felt completely calm because I believed he was managing this one too. Then he looked at the animals, looked at me, and said someone needed to stay behind because the shelter they had booked did not accept pets. And hotels nearby were full, and an empty house during a storm was an invitation to problems he did not want to deal with when they returned. I waited for him to laugh, or to follow that sentence with another one that made it make sense. But he just picked up his keys and told me the flashlights were in the kitchen drawer and that I should fill the bathtub with water. Before the pressure dropped, my mother Petra stood near the front door with her purse already on her arm. And she looked at me with an expression I had seen before. The one she wore when she had already agreed with my father before the conversation started. And she said nothing, she just looked. And then she looked away. My brother Dex was 16 and already buckled into the back seat when I walked onto the porch to ask my father if he was serious. And he told me to go back inside, that I was old enough to handle one night, and that the storm would probably veer north anyway, the way they always did. He pulled out of the driveway without stopping, and I watched the car until I could not see its taillights anymore. And then I went back inside and sat on the kitchen floor with Biscuit pressed against my left side and Fig on my lap and Pip circling both of us, like he was trying to hold us together by motion. Alone. The power went out 4 hours later, And the wind got loud in a way I had never heard wind get loud before, not like a sound but like a pressure. Like something enormous leaning against the house and testing whether it would hold. And I moved us all into the interior hallway and sat there with a flashlight in my back against the wall while the roof made sounds. I still hear sometimes when I am almost asleep. I had known for years. In the quiet way you know things you are not ready to say out loud, that I was not my father's favorite. That something about me had always required more patience from him than he wanted to give, and that my brother occupied a place in our family that had never been offered to me. When Dex got into trouble at school, my father called it boys being boys and drove him to baseball practice the same afternoon. But when I got the highest score in my grade on a regional writing competition, my father looked at the certificate and said I should focus more on practical skills. Dex got a bedroom renovation when he turned 15. New paint, new furniture, a desk lamp that actually worked. And when I asked my mother if I could get a bookshelf for my room, she said we needed to wait until finances settled. Which they never did. Not for my room anyway. Actually, it seems there's a deeper reason behind this discrimination between siblings. It always strikes me as odd that parents don't love their children equally. After all, aren't they both their children? I was not angry then the way I would learn to be angry later. I was just quietly confused the way children are when something feels wrong but nobody around them names it. So they decide the wrongness must live inside themselves. The only person who made me feel like I was worth paying attention to was Amara Whitfield, who lived 3 houses down in a yellow house with a garden that somehow survived every season, and who had watched me grow up from her porch with the kind of steady attention that never felt like charity. Amara used to save books for me from the library sales and leave them in a bag on her porch with a sticky note that said my name on it. And when I was 14, she told me I had a mind that would take me somewhere, and I held that sentence for years, the way you hold a match in a dark room. The night of the storm, when my phone died and the wind peaked and something heavy hit the roof so hard that Biscuit howled once and then went completely silent. I sat in the dark and felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The kind that only comes when the last thing you were hoping was not true finally proves itself to be exactly as true as you feared. My family came back. 20 hours later. My father, checking the exterior walls before he checked my face. Or were the walls or the house more precious to them than I was? My mother asking if the animals had damaged anything. Dex complaining that the hotel mattress had ruined his back. I told them I thought the roof was going to come in. And my father said the structure was sound, and he had known it would hold. And my mother said I should be grateful we had a house to come back to. And Dex looked at me with that particular expression he had always used. The one that said he knew I was upset and found it mildly interesting. I think something's off. Here the family knows a flood is coming, but isn't really taking any precautions. Are they just too laid back, or is that just my impression? That was the night I started counting the days until I was somewhere else. And the only person I told was Talia Vance. Talia and I had been best friends since the 5th grade. And if you had asked me then to name the one person in my life who I was certain would never hurt me, I would have said her name before I finished your sentence. I would have said it the way you say the sky is blue, like it required no thought at all, like it was simply one of the things that was true about the world. She had been at her cousin's house during the storm. And when she called me 2 days later and I told her what had happened, she cried. And her crying felt like the first real thing anyone had given me since the wind started. And I told her everything, every detail, every moment in that hallway with the animals. Every sentence my family had said when they returned. Talia was the one I told about the scholarship applications I was filling out in secret, about the universities I had researched, about the plan I had been building quietly for 2 years to leave this town and never let my family's version of me follow me out the door. She listened to all of it. And she said all the right things. And I believed every word she said, because that is what trust does. It makes you believe the person in front of you is the same on the inside as they appear to be on the outside. And it does not warn you when it is wrong. Here we see you opening up, sharing the things that are on your mind with someone. That's how trust begins. You come to trust the person you're talking to, because sharing is a need. I got a full scholarship 3 months later to a university 4 hours away. And the first call I made was to Talia, and she screamed with excitement in a way that made me laugh harder than I had laughed in months. And I thought, this is what it feels like when someone is genuinely happy for you. And I held that feeling like it was mine. The night before I left, she came over and we sat on my porch until almost midnight. And she hugged me at the end and said, "You are going to be extraordinary, Zinnia, and nobody deserves it more than you." And I drove away the next morning believing that I had left with at least one thing intact. I had no idea that the person who hugged me goodbye had already decided what she was going to do with everything I had ever trusted her with, and I had no idea that the moment my life finally started, someone I loved was already quietly preparing to take it apart. I built my new life slowly, the way you build anything that actually lasts, with small decisions made every single day, with early mornings and late nights, and the particular kind of focus that only comes when you know exactly what you are escaping and exactly what you are running toward. University was not easy. And I will not pretend it was, because the first semester, I ate poorly and slept less than I should have, and sat in the back of lecture halls feeling like everyone around me had received some instruction manual for existing in the world that I had somehow never been given. I always saw myself as being at a disadvantage. I always started the race behind them. But there was one thing I knew for sure: even if I started behind, I had to overtake them all. That was a sign of my determination, or perhaps my only option. But I studied harder than anyone in my program. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because every good grade felt like a door opening slightly wider. And I had spent enough years in rooms where the doors were being quietly closed to know the difference between the two. I made friends slowly and carefully, the way people do when they have already learned what careless trust costs. And I built a small circle of people who felt solid, who said what they meant, who showed up when they said they would show up. I called my family occasionally, and those calls were short and surface level. My mother asking if I was eating, my father asking if my program was practical, Dex asking nothing at all. And I kept my real life completely separate from those conversations, the way you keep a flame away from wind. I did not call Talia as much during that first year, partly because I was busy, and partly because of something I could not name yet. A small, quiet feeling in my chest whenever I thought about her that did not feel like warmth the way it used to. That felt more like a question I was not ready to ask. Then one evening in the spring of my second year, I received a message from a girl named Odette, who had gone to my high school and who I had known only slightly, and the message was short and careful and clearly difficult for her to write. And it said that she thought I deserved to know something, and that she was sorry she had not said it sooner. Odette told me that for the past year and a half, Talia had been spending significant time with my family, specifically with my father, who had apparently decided that Talia was the kind of daughter he had always wanted, and that my mother had welcomed her into the house with a warmth that Odette described, carefully and without cruelty, as the warmth I had never personally received. I sat with that information for a long time before I read the rest of the message, because sometimes your body understands something before your mind is ready to process it. And my body had gone very still in the way it goes still when something true and terrible is arriving. Odette told me that Talia had been sharing things, details about my scholarship applications, about the reasons I had left, about the things I had said in private about my father and my mother and the storm, and that she had framed all of it not as the testimony of someone who had been hurt, but as the behavior of someone unstable, someone who had invented grievances, someone whose success had made her dangerous and cold. It's very hard for me to put into words what I felt at that moment. It was a terrible feeling. I had the sense that everything I'd confided in him would be used against me. How could I ever trust anyone again? My father had apparently told several people in town that I had left because I was selfish and ungrateful, and that the proof of this was that I had shared private family information with outsiders to make myself look sympathetic. And the private family information he was referring to was everything I had ever whispered to Talia in the dark. What was said about me had certainly hurt me deeply. But what really broke my heart was that my father listened to them and spoke ill of me to others. If you can't trust your own father, who can you trust? She had taken every confidence I had ever given her, every fear, every quiet truth, every moment I had made myself vulnerable because I believed she was safe, and she had carried all of it back to the people I had trusted her to help me survive, and she had handed it to them like a gift. I did not cry immediately, which surprised me. I just sat very still in my small apartment with the window open and the spring air coming in. And I thought about every conversation Talia and I had ever had. And I began to see the shape of things I had missed. The way she always asked follow-up questions about my family after I thought the subject was closed. The way she had seemed almost too interested in the details of my father's behavior. The way she had occasionally said things like, "Maybe he just doesn't know how to show it," in a tone that I had read as empathy but now understood differently. I did not contact Talia immediately. And I did not contact my family, because I had learned enough by then to know that the worst thing you can do when someone has been gathering information against you is to give them more. And so I waited, and I thought, and I planned. Amara Whitfield called me 2 weeks later. Because Amara always seemed to know when something was happening, even when no one told her directly, and she said, "Zip, I heard some things and I want you to know that none of us who watched you grow up believe a word of it." And that sentence cracked something open in me that I had been holding sealed for a very long time. I went home once, about a month after Odette's message, not to my family's house but to Amara, and I sat in her kitchen and told her everything. The storm, the scholarship, Talia, all of it. And she listened the way she had always listened, completely and without judgment. And when I finished, she said, "The people who raised you made a choice about who you were before you were old enough to show them who you actually are. And Talia made a choice about what kind of person she wanted to be. And neither of those choices is your fault." I asked Amara why she thought Talia had done it, and she was quiet for a moment before she said, "Some people find it easier to belong to power than to stand beside someone who has none. And your father has always been a person that certain people want to impress." That was the truest thing anyone had said to me about it. And I held it for a long time. I thought long and hard to myself, was having power in this world really that important, even at the cost of betraying people's trust? Was it worth sacrificing the very people who would always support you just to gain power? I went to see Talia on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. And when she opened her door and saw me standing there, something moved across her face very quickly. Something that was not quite guilt, and not quite fear, but lived somewhere between the two. And then her expression settled into the careful warmth she had always worn so naturally. She said she was so glad to see me, and she moved to hug me, and I took a small step back. Not dramatically, just enough. And I told her I had heard from Odette, and I watched her face change again, slower this time. Like a mask coming off in stages, she started with denial, then moved to minimizing, saying she had only mentioned a few things. That she had been worried about me, that my father had reached out to her first and she had not known how to say no. And each explanation was slightly different from the last. One in the way that lies always are when someone is assembling them in real time. I let her talk until she ran out of comfortable words, and then I said, "You were the only person I trusted with the truth about that storm. And you gave it to the people who left me in it." She went quiet after that. Genuinely quiet, the kind of quiet that means something landed. And she looked at me with an expression I had not expected, which was not defiance but something closer to shame, and she said, I thought if I helped them understand you better, it would fix things. I told her that she had not been trying to fix things. She had been trying to belong somewhere, and that belonging somewhere at another person's expense was not kindness. It was just a more complicated version of selfishness. She started to cry, and the crying looked real, and I felt something that surprised me, which was not anger, not anymore, but a kind of distance. The same empty calm I had felt watching my father's car disappear into the storm. The feeling of finally understanding something you had been trying not to understand for a long time. I told her I did not hate her, because I did not. Hating her would have required giving her more space inside me than she had earned. And I had spent enough of my life giving space to people who had not earned it. I told her I hoped she would eventually figure out who she was without borrowing other people's approval to do it. And then I left, and I did not look back at her door. Because I had learned by then that looking back was a habit I could not afford. My father called me 3 weeks later. The first real call in almost 2 years, and I answered because I was ready. Because everything I had needed to understand, I finally understood. And I sat in my car in a parking lot and listened to him speak in the careful tone he used when he wanted something. The tone where his voice went slightly softer and his words became slightly more generous than usual. He said he had been thinking about things, and that he wanted to clear the air, and that family was important to him, regardless of what I might have heard from people who did not fully understand the situation. I asked him one question, and only one. I asked him if he remembered what he said to me the morning after the storm, when I told him I had been afraid. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said he did not remember it exactly. I told him that he had said I was old enough to handle it, and that my mother had sighed and called me dramatic, and that my brother had told me I should be grateful they trusted me, and that none of them had asked whether I was hurt. He started to speak, and I said, I am not calling to argue. And I am not calling to forgive you on a timeline that makes you comfortable. I am calling because I wanted you to know that I am well. That I built something real, without any of you. And that I understand now that the storm was not a mistake you made under pressure. It was the clearest thing you ever showed me about how much I mattered. He did not have an answer for that. And the silence stretched long enough that I understood he was not going to find one. I told him I wished him no harm. And I meant it. I wished him a quiet, ordinary life in which he had enough time to sit with the truth of who he had been. Not as punishment, but as the natural consequence of choices that had always been his to make. Then I ended the call. And I sat in the parking lot until my breathing steadied. And then I drove back to the life I had built, the one that belonged entirely to me. The one where no one held the power to leave me in the dark. Amara passed away 2 years after that visit, peacefully and surrounded by her garden. And I flew back for her service and stood at the edge of it with the kind of grief that feels like gratitude turned inside out, because she had given me something that no storm and no betrayal had been able to reach. She had shown me what it looked like when someone chose to see you clearly and kept choosing it. Anyway, I started a small mentorship program the year after that, working with young people in their first years away from difficult homes, helping them build the practical skills and the emotional vocabulary that nobody had given me. And I named it after something Amara had written in a sticky note on a book she left for me once. A single line that said, "You are not too much. You are exactly enough," and someone failed to see it. Some people will say that what I did was cold, that I should have forgiven more quickly. That family deserves chances that strangers do not, and I understand why people say that, because it is a comfortable thing to believe. But I learned something in that hallway with the animals and the wind. I learned that love without protection is just a story people tell themselves, and that the truest measure of anyone is not what they say when things are easy, but what they choose when leaving you behind would cost them nothing. I am not the girl who sat in the dark waiting for someone to come back anymore, and I never will be again. And that is not a tragedy. That is the whole point.